Her husband left her with nothing but debt. Then, one stormy night in a rotting farmhouse, she tore into the wall, and her hammer struck something that glittered like a secret the world was never supposed to find. Before we dive in, let me ask you, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story will absolutely blow your mind. The phone call came on a gray Tuesday, the kind of day when the sky hung low and even the streetlights looked tired. Samantha Hayes balanced a stack of overdue bills on the chipped kitchen counter while Oliver sat on the floor, wheezing softly as he tried to piece together a puzzle that was missing half its pieces. The voice on the other end of the line was flat, rehearsed, and clinical, the kind of tone used by people who deliver the same news a dozen times a week. "Miss Hayes," the lawyer began, "I'm sorry to inform you that your uncle has passed away. He named you sole heir to his property." Sam blinked. "Property?" "A farmhouse in Ohio," he continued. "Old, neglected. Barely standing, if I'm being honest. Most folks would tear it down and sell the land for scrap. Up to you, of course." She stared at the faded linoleum floor, her stomach twisting. An inheritance. From an uncle she hadn't spoken to in years. A man who had cut himself off from the family long before Oliver was born. It didn't feel real. It felt like one more strange turn in a life already tangled with too many wrong turns. I'll think about it," she managed. The lawyer's voice stayed even, but the words landed sharp. "Don't wait too long. Taxes are overdue. It's more of a burden than a gift." The call ended, and silence swelled in the apartment, broken only by Oliver's cough. She looked at him, his pale cheeks, the inhaler always within reach, the way he tried to stay brave, even when breathing felt like climbing a hill. The rent notice on the fridge glared back at her like a red warning light. 2 weeks, maybe less, before they'd be out. A worthless farmhouse or a cardboard box under the freeway, those were the options. That night, Sam sat at the tiny kitchen table, head in her hands. Her second job at the diner barely covered food, and the hospital bills from Oliver's last asthma attack still haunted her in monthly reminders. She'd worked herself into exhaustion and still couldn't claw her way out. The idea of moving to Ohio into a crumbling farmhouse seemed absurd. But absurdity was better than eviction. Oliver shuffled over in his socks, sketchbook in hand. "Mom?" She lifted her head, blinking back exhaustion. "Yeah, baby?" He showed her a drawing of a house, not their apartment, but something larger, with a porch and a crooked roof. Crayons colored the windows bright yellow, like light spilled out of them. "Do you think our new house will look like this?" Her throat tightened. "Maybe," she said softly. He smiled, small and hopeful, and in that moment her decision was made. Not because she wanted to, not because she believed in miracles, but because her boy needed walls, a roof, a place to dream, even if it was falling apart. 2 weeks later, their lives fit into the back seat of a rusted sedan. Trash bags for suitcases, Oliver clutching his stuffed bear, Sam staring at the road ahead, unsure if she was driving toward salvation or another dead end. The lawyer had said the farmhouse was a ruin, peeling wallpaper, creaky stairs, broken windows. She braced herself for all of it. What she didn't brace herself for was the silence she would feel the first night inside. A silence too heavy, too deliberate, as if the walls were holding their breath. To her, the farmhouse wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't even a home. It was a last chance, a reluctant escape from the city that had squeezed her dry. She told herself it was just shelter, a lifeline thrown into a storm she was already drowning in. But deep down, something whispered different. This house had secrets, and whether she wanted them or not, they were now hers to carry. She drove on, unaware that every mile brought her closer to the night when her hammer would strike the wall and reveal a fortune she never asked for, and a danger she never imagined. It was supposed to be a new start. Instead, it was the call that changed everything. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Sam's old sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the driveway. For a moment, she didn't move. Her hands clutched the steering wheel as if letting go would mean admitting they were really here, that this wreck of wood and weeds was now their home. Oliver pressed his face to the window, his breath fogging the glass. The farmhouse stood like a wounded soldier, upright but beaten. What had once been white siding was now faded to a sickly gray, strips of paint curling away like old scabs. Shutters dangled crookedly from rusted hinges, one hanging by a single screw, as though the next strong wind would finish the job. Weeds had conquered the porch, tall and wild, climbing the rotting steps in defiance. The front door sagged slightly inward, as if even it had grown tired of standing guard. Oliver coughed the moment he stepped out of the car, his thin frame shaking. Sam's heart twisted. She pressed a hand to his back, steadying him. "Easy, Ollie," she murmured. The damp country air was supposed to be better than Detroit's smog, but the moldy scent that wafted from the porch told her this place might be worse. "Is this it?" Oliver asked, his voice hopeful in spite of everything. He clutched his stuffed bear under one arm, the same way he had when they'd left their apartment for the last time. Sam forced a smile. "Yeah, this is it." Dragging their bags up the creaking steps felt like crossing into enemy territory. The key the lawyer had mailed clattered against the lock before it finally turned. The door groaned open, and a rush of stale air met them, thick with dust and something sour beneath it. Sam coughed into her sleeve. Inside was worse. The floor sagged under her first step, boards bowing like tired ribs. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, faded flowers barely clinging to plaster. Water stains streaked down the ceiling like bruises left behind by storms. A chandelier that might once have been elegant hung limp, its glass cracked, one bulb flickering as if it resented being asked to work after all these years. Oliver's sneakers squeaked against the warped wood. He looked around, wide-eyed, sketchbook already under his arm, as if he might start drawing the moment inspiration struck. Sam, on the other hand, could barely look. She muttered under her breath, "This isn't a house?" "It's a ruin." Her voice echoed strangely in the hollow room, as if the walls had caught her words and were holding them tight. She rubbed her arms, uneasy. It was too quiet, not the kind of peaceful silence she'd longed for in the city, but a heavy kind, one that pressed against her chest like a weight. Oliver tilted his head, listening. "Mom, it feels like it's waiting." The words sent a chill down her spine. Waiting. For what? She swallowed hard and forced a laugh, ruffling his hair. "The only thing this place is waiting for is a bulldozer." He grinned, not catching the edge in her voice, and wandered deeper inside, sketchbook open, pencil scratching as he walked. Sam dropped their bags in the middle of the floor, the thud raising a cloud of dust that made her eyes sting. Everywhere she looked, decay had claimed victory. The kitchen tiles were cracked and mottled with grime. Cabinet doors hung crooked, one missing entirely. The smell of mildew grew stronger near the sink. Upstairs, she knew, the rooms would be no better, and yet, in spite of herself, she felt something stir in her chest. Not hope, not exactly, but a strange pull, as if the house were daring her to look past the rot, to dig beneath the surface. She shook it off quickly. She didn't have the luxury of curiosity. What she had was a boy to take care of, bills to escape, and a roof, however broken, that still beat the cold sidewalks of Detroit. Sam sat down heavily on the bottom step of the staircase. Her hands trembled as she rubbed her temples. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, "one room at a time." From the corner of her eye, she caught Oliver crouched near the wall, tracing his fingers along a patch of plaster where the wallpaper had crumbled away. He looked up at her with that same quiet wonder he always carried. "Mom," he said softly, "it feels like the house is trying to remember something." Sam's chest tightened. She turned away quickly, forcing herself to unpack, to busy her hands. She couldn't afford to indulge his imagination, not here, Not now. But as she opened a bag and laid out Oliver's inhaler on the dusty mantelpiece, she couldn't shake his words. The house wasn't just broken, it was waiting. And though she wouldn't admit it out loud, she felt it too. The first night in the farmhouse stretched on endlessly, every second punctuated by the uneasy noises of a structure too old to be still. Sam lay awake on the sagging mattress they'd dragged into the corner of what used to be the parlor, staring at the cracked ceiling. The wind whistled through gaps in the window frames, rattling the glass, and the house itself seemed to shift and groan like an old ship lost at sea. Sleep was impossible. Each creak pulled her further into wakefulness, each sigh of the floorboards reminding her that this house had stood long before her and might well outlast her, too. Eventually, she gave up. She reached for the flashlight and rose quietly, careful not to disturb Oliver, who slept curled up on the couch with his bear clutched tight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, scattering shadows that leapt across the peeling wallpaper. Her footsteps echoed more than they should have, a hollow kind of sound, as if the rooms themselves were listening. She wandered the narrow hall, passing faded family portraits left behind, faces of strangers whose eyes seemed to follow her. The air felt damp, heavy with dust that clung to her throat. She tried to tell herself it was nothing more than old wood settling, the bones of the house shifting under years of neglect. But then she froze. Near the staircase she heard it, a muffled sound that didn't belong to wind or wood. Not a creak, not a groan, but something sharper, metallic, like a coin dropped in another room, only softer, buried. She swung the flashlight toward the wall, its beam catching on cracks in the plaster. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer, pressing her ear against the cool surface. Nothing. Silence, thick and smothering. She stayed there longer than she meant to, breathing slow, listening. When she finally pulled back, goosebumps prickled along her arms. "Old pipes?" she muttered under her breath, though the farmhouse hadn't seen running water in years. "Critters, maybe? Rats?" Her voice sounded thin, unconvincing, even to herself. The next morning, Oliver told her he'd heard it too. Over a bowl of cereal, his eyes wide with wonder, he said, "It's like the house is talking, Mom." He didn't sound scared. He sounded curious, almost excited, as if the groans and whispers were part of a secret conversation he was trying to overhear. Sam forced a laugh, ruffling his hair. "Houses don't talk, Ollie. It's probably just animals in the walls." But the sound stayed with her. It lingered even after the sun came up, even after she busied herself with cleaning and patching leaks. Every time she passed the staircase, her gaze flicked to that spot on the wall. At first she ignored it. Then she found her hand brushing over the plaster without thinking, fingertips trailing across the rough surface as if trying to find something hidden beneath. One night, when she pressed her palm flat against the wall, she could have sworn she felt the faintest vibration. A pulse, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of something waiting. She jerked her hand back immediately, her own pulse racing. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered to herself. But the house groaned again, long and low, as if mocking her denial. Sam laughed nervously, shaking her head, and turned the flashlight off. She told herself she was tired, her mind playing tricks. The walls didn't breathe. They didn't whisper. They certainly didn't keep secrets. And yet, as she climbed the stairs and settled back onto the mattress beside Oliver, the memory of that metallic ring wouldn't leave her. She closed her eyes, but all she could hear was that faint echo in her head, like a warning or an invitation. She didn't know it yet, but the walls weren't empty. They were keeping watch. And what lay inside them was not just metal, not just forgotten history, but something people had once been willing to kill for, and maybe still were. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Sam stepped into the hardware store, its air thick with the scent of oil, sawdust, and stale coffee. Oliver trailed behind her, nose pressed to the glass display of pocket knives, his sketchbook tucked under one arm like a secret he never let go of. Sam clutched the crumpled list she'd scribbled the night before. Nails, caulk, plaster mix, anything that could patch the gaping wounds of a house that looked ready to collapse. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he'd been rooted there longer than the store itself. His hair was gray and greasy, skin weathered like old leather, and his fingers yellowed from years of nicotine. He barely glanced up when she approached, but the moment she said her name, he froze. "Hayes?" His voice was slow, uncertain, as though dredging up a memory. His eyes, sharp beneath drooping lids, fixed on her with something between suspicion and pity. "Yes," Sam said carefully. "I just inherited the old farmhouse off Mill Creek Road. Need supplies to start fixing it up." The man's hand hovered over the register, unmoving. Then he leaned forward across the counter, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial rasp. "That farmhouse is cursed." Sam blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. "Excuse me?" "Your uncle," he said, his lips twisting around the word as though it carried a bad taste, "kept to himself for a reason. Folks say he didn't trust anyone. Some say he was hiding something. Others—" He shook his head. "Others say the house itself won't let anyone rest easy inside." Sam forced a small laugh, though it came out brittle. "Well, I'm not much for ghost stories. Just need some tools." But his eyes stayed on her, hard and unblinking. "If you're smart, you'll sell the land. Get out before it swallows you up too." The words settled heavy in her chest. She slid her list across the counter, pretending she wasn't rattled, pretending her heart wasn't picking up speed. He rang up her supplies without another word, but the way his gaze lingered felt like a warning he wanted her to carry out into the world. Oliver tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Why does he look at you like that?" Sam gave him a quick smile. "Some people don't like change, that's all." But she didn't believe her own words, and she knew Oliver didn't either. They loaded their purchases into the trunk, the morning sun sharp against the faded paint of their car. Sam slammed the trunk shut and looked up, and froze. At the far edge of the parking lot, a dark pickup sat idling. The windows were tinted, but the driver's outline was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, motionless. She felt the weight of his stare even across the distance, a chill settling on her neck. Oliver, oblivious, lifted his hand and waved cheerfully. "Hi!" The driver didn't move. No smile, no wave, not even a tilt of his head, just silence, heavy and watchful. Sam's stomach twisted. She placed a firm hand on Oliver's shoulder and guided him into the passenger seat. Her instincts screamed, sharp, undeniable, that this wasn't just small-town curiosity. This was something colder, hungrier. She buckled Oliver in, her hands shaking slightly, and slid behind the wheel. As she started the engine, her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The truck was still there, unmoving, the driver's gaze burning holes into her back. She pulled out slowly, pretending not to notice, but her knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. Oliver hummed beside her, distracted with his sketchbook. "Do you think the people here will like us?" he asked. Sam's throat tightened. She forced another smile he couldn't see. "Of course they will." But she didn't believe it, not anymore. As they drove back toward the farmhouse, the feeling wouldn't leave her. Something about that house wasn't just known in town, it was remembered. And if she didn't figure out why, she feared someone else already had. Someone who might be waiting. The storm rolled in without warning, a black wall of clouds pressing against the horizon until the sky itself seemed to cave. By dusk, thunder cracked so hard the windows rattled in their frames, and rain came sideways in sheets, pelting the old farmhouse like a punishment. Sam moved from room to room, catching leaks with buckets and bowls, each one filling faster than she could empty them. The roof moaned under the weight of water, and every gust of wind made the whole house tremble. Oliver sat curled up on the couch, his blanket pulled tight to his chin, wide eyes tracking every flash of lightning. Each boom of thunder made him flinch, and Sam felt the guilt gnaw at her again, the same familiar ache. He should have been somewhere safe, not trapped in a crumbling farmhouse that felt like it could split apart at the seams. A window in the hallway gave up with a sharp crack, shards of glass skittering across the floor. "Stay put!" Sam shouted, grabbing her hammer and a loose plank she'd found in the shed earlier that day. She pressed the wood against the frame, raising the hammer to nail it down, when the storm gave another earth-shaking roar. Her swing missed the edge, glancing instead off the wall just beside the window. The sound that followed made her freeze. Not the dull thud of wood, not the hollow crumble of plaster. A metallic clang, deep and heavy, reverberating through the wall like a bell. Her breath caught. She frowned and hit the same spot again, this time deliberately. Clang. The sound was sharper now, unmistakable. Oliver had crept halfway down the hall, blanket trailing behind him like a shadow. His eyes were wide, reflecting the flicker of the lightning outside. "Mom, do it again." Sam hesitated, her pulse quickening. She raised the hammer once more and swung. The wall rang back at her, metallic and solid. Not the voice of a house, but of something buried inside it. She dropped the hammer, her hands trembling. Slowly, carefully, she dug her fingers into the cracked plaster, peeling it away until a narrow gap appeared. The beam of her flashlight caught on something within. A glint, a shimmer, not nails, not pipes, not the dull glimmer of old hinges or bolts, but polished, deliberate. For a split second, lightning flashed through the broken window, and the gleam answered back, cold and sharp, as if the storm itself had reached inside the wall and lit it from within. Sam's breath hitched. She leaned closer, reaching a hand into the gap, her fingers brushing against the object. It was smooth, unnaturally so, and cold, even in the thick humidity of the storm. She gripped an edge, pulled, and felt weight resist her, heavy and unyielding. Her arm shook as she dragged it out into the light. The plank slipped from her other hand, forgotten. In her palm, wrapped in layers of dust and time, lay a bar. Rectangular, dense, gleaming faintly beneath the grime. The engraved surface was worn but still legible. U.S. Treasury, 1947. Oliver gasped, his blanket slipping from his shoulders. "Mom, what is that?" Sam stared at it, unable to speak, her heartbeat pounding so loudly she could barely hear the storm. She knew what it was, knew it without question. Gold. A gold bar. The weight of it nearly pulled her arm down, not just from its density, but from the gravity of what it meant. Questions battered her all at once. Who had hidden it here? How long had it been buried in the walls of this forgotten farmhouse? And more urgently, had anyone else known it was here? Oliver stepped closer, reaching out, but she pulled it back instinctively, clutching it to her chest. His small voice trembled. "Does this mean we're rich?" Sam's throat went dry. She wanted to tell him yes, to let him believe in that sudden miracle, but all she could think of was the man in the dark truck, the hardware clerk's warning, the journal entries of her uncle she hadn't yet read. The storm howled louder, rattling the walls around them as if the house itself wanted to keep its secrets. Sam looked down at the gold bar, the polished surface catching another flash of lightning, and felt the weight of a truth she wasn't ready for. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a message. And whatever it meant, their lives would never be the same again. The bar was colder than she expected, so heavy it seemed to drag the air down with it. Sam stared at the engraving, her thumb brushing away the dust that clung to the faint stamp of letters and numbers. U.S. Treasury, 1947. The words looked official, deliberate, carved by hands that had expected this metal to be accounted for, not buried in the ribs of a farmhouse no one had touched in decades. For a moment her knees threatened to give out. Gold, not costume trinkets, not cheap plating, not the idea of wealth, but real, dense, undeniable gold. Oliver hovered beside her, blanket forgotten on the floor, eyes wide and shining. His voice cracked into a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might make the bar vanish. "We're rich." Sam laughed, though the sound was shaky and unsteady, torn between joy and fear. She had seen gold before, on screens, in textbooks, in museum displays, but never in her hand, never close enough to feel its weight pressing into her bones. The weight of it wasn't just physical, it was a future she thought she'd lost. It was Oliver's inhaler prescriptions filled without panic. It was groceries bought without coins scraped from the bottom of her purse. It was rent, stability, a life where survival wasn't measured day to day. For one dizzying second, she nearly cried, clutching the bar as though it were a life raft in a storm, but reality clawed its way back. Her uncle, the house, the strange looks in town, the man in the truck. She forced herself to breathe, slow and steady. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured, more to herself than to Oliver. "Why would this be here? Who hid it? And why in our walls?" Oliver shrugged, still fixated on the gleam. "Maybe Uncle wanted us to find it." The simplicity of his answer twisted her heart. Maybe he was right, or maybe her uncle had been hiding something so dangerous he couldn't risk anyone knowing. Sam looked again at the bar, its edges sharp, its shine dull under years of plaster dust. It wasn't just money. It was a secret big enough to be buried, big enough to guard, maybe even big enough to kill for. Her breath caught in her throat. Safety. That was the real question. Were they safe now that she had pulled this from the wall? Her instinct screamed no. She shoved the bar into her backpack, the zipper rasping loud in the storm-heavy silence. Then she grabbed plaster from the pile of supplies she'd brought home, sealing the hole in the wall as best she could with shaking hands. Each smear of putty felt like closing a wound, but the house seemed to hum beneath her touch, as though aware of what she had stolen from its bones. When she finished, she pressed her palm flat against the patch, whispering under her breath, "Stay quiet." Turning back to Oliver, she crouched low, gripping his shoulders. "Listen to me. You can't tell anyone about this, not your teacher, not kids at school, not anyone. Do you understand?" His face was pale, but he nodded, clutching his bear again. "Not even Mr. Carter?" "Not even him." She forced a smile she didn't feel. "It's our secret." Oliver zipped his lips with a small, serious gesture, but she could see the excitement in his eyes, the way children carried secrets like burning candles, careful but unsteady. One slip, one spark, and everything could catch fire. Sam sat back against the wall, the storm outside finally beginning to ease, though her heart still thundered in her chest. She thought of the hardware store clerk's warning, of the man who'd watched her with eyes like a predator. Small towns lived on whispers. Secrets here were never safe for long. She touched the backpack at her side, feeling the solid weight inside. For the first time in years, she was holding the promise of something better, something that could change everything. But for the first time in her life, she was terrified of what came with it. Gold was supposed to be precious. To her, it suddenly felt like a curse. The farmhouse was quiet except for the low hum of Oliver's old laptop, its cracked casing warm against Sam's legs as she sat hunched on the mattress. The boy had fallen asleep hours ago, curled beneath his blanket with his bear under one arm, his chest rising and falling with the uneven rhythm of a child who never breathed easily. Sam brushed a strand of hair from her eyes red from exhaustion, and forced herself to keep scrolling. She couldn't sleep. Not with the gold bar hidden in her backpack at the foot of the bed, its weight heavy even in the dark. She typed the words again, U.S. Treasury, 1947, missing gold. The search brought up fragmentary reports, grainy newspaper scans archived on forgotten websites, shipments gone missing in the years after the war. Gold meant for reconstruction projects that never reached their destinations. She read about cargo trains that left their stations but were never accounted for at their endpoints, about storage vaults that showed numbers on paper but not in reality. There were whispers of black market trades, of bullion being siphoned off by corrupt officials and passed quietly through hidden channels. She found no concrete answers, just theories, hushed rumors, shadows of something too large to be named. And yet each vague headline pressed harder against the bar of gold she had held in her hands. It wasn't just money. It was part of a story that had stretched across decades, a story that governments and criminals alike might have buried together. She thought of her uncle, a recluse, a man who shut his doors to family, to neighbors, to anyone who might have asked questions. She remembered visiting him once as a child, her mother tugging her away from the porch when he refused to answer the door. He'd always been described as paranoid, untrusting, a man who didn't want company. But what if it hadn't been paranoia? What if it had been protection? Sam leaned back against the wall, the plaster rough through her shirt, her mind racing. Could he have hidden them? Could he have spent years sealing those bars into the bones of this farmhouse, one wall at a time, until the house itself became a vault? Her stomach tightened at the thought. The place she had once seen as her last resort, her personal ruin, might be more valuable than anything she had ever dreamed of. The farmhouse was no longer just a house. It was a map, a puzzle box, and she had stumbled into it blind. For a fleeting moment she felt a rush of something like relief. If there were more bars hidden in the walls, this wasn't just survival money. It was a fortune, a way out of every bill, every hospital visit, every long night of scraping by. She imagined Oliver breathing easy, imagined him running without fear of collapsing, imagined giving him the life she'd never had. But the feeling didn't last. Relief was quickly devoured by dread. If she could find these fragments of history with a few late-night searches, then so could anyone else. Anyone with enough obsession, enough greed, enough memory of what had gone missing all those years ago. And if her uncle had lived with this secret, if he had been guarding it all this time, what had it cost him? Her hand shook as she closed the laptop, its screen going black. She stared at the shadows stretching across the room, listening to the house groan under the weight of the storm outside. He hadn't just died, she realized. Not in her mind, not anymore. She thought of the warnings at the hardware store, of the man in the truck who had watched her without blinking. What if her uncle's death hadn't been old age? What if it had been the price of guarding what was hidden? Sam pulled the backpack closer, laying her palm against the canvas where the bar was tucked away. The cold pressed through, steady and unyielding, as if reminding her of what she now carried. She was no longer just a mother trying to keep her boy safe. She was a thief, a target, a reluctant heir to a secret that didn't belong to her. She lay back down beside Oliver, but sleep didn't come. The farmhouse creaked around her like it was breathing, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if it was protecting her or waiting to bury her along with its history. The morning sun had barely broken through the mist when Sam saw it. The same dark truck sitting at the far end of the gravel driveway, engine idling low like a growl. Its windows were still tinted, hiding everything but the shape of the driver leaning against the door, a figure cut from shadow. The sight made her stomach twist so hard she almost dropped the mug she was holding. She glanced down at Oliver beside her on the porch. He followed her gaze, and his face lit up with that innocent spark she wished she could protect forever. Before she could stop him, his small hand shot up, and he waved, cheerful and trusting. "Hi," he called softly, voice light, oblivious. Sam grabbed his arm and tugged him back inside so fast the mug sloshed coffee onto the floor. "Stay away from the window," she hissed, trying to sound calm, but feeling the pulse hammering in her neck. She crouched down to his level, her palms firm on his shoulders. "Don't wave at strangers, Ollie. Not out here. Not now." His brows knitted in confusion. But he didn't look mean. She pressed her lips tight, unable to explain the kind of mean that didn't show on faces but lived in stillness, in long stares that didn't blink. She guided him into the living room, drew the curtain back with just 2 fingers, and peeked out. The man hadn't moved. He leaned against the truck with one foot crossed over the other, smoking slow, the cigarette glowing like an eye in the morning haze. Even from here she could feel it, his gaze fixed on the house, not curious but deliberate, patient. The way predators wait for prey to stop pretending it's safe. He stayed like that for nearly an hour, the sound of the engine a low murmur under the distant rustle of trees. Sam's shoulders ached from tension. She kept expecting him to leave, to drive off, but he didn't. He just watched. When he finally flicked the cigarette to the ground and climbed back into the cab, the truck rolled down the road so slowly the tires barely kicked up dust. All day Sam carried that image, the quiet stare, the smoke curling in the air, the unspoken claim of someone who knew more about her house than she did. She double-checked the doors. She closed every curtain. She kept Oliver close. She told herself she was being paranoid, but even the house felt different now, like it was bracing itself with her. By nightfall, the storm had passed, but the ground was still slick with mud. She went outside to take the trash to the barn and stopped cold just beyond the porch steps. Boot prints, deep, fresh, pressed into the soft earth near the barn door. Not hers, not Oliver's. Her throat tightened. The prints led toward the barn, then doubled back, circling the house once before vanishing into the tall weeds near the property line. She turned slowly, scanning the tree line, the horizon, the long empty road. Nothing but silence. She hurried back inside, locking the door with fingers that shook. Oliver was on the couch with his sketchbook, drawing without looking up. She forced a smile at him, a weak thing that felt like paper against her face, then climbed the stairs and went to the bedroom. From the closet she pulled the backpack and unzipped it, her hands trembling as she drew out the gold bar. Its cold weight hit her palms, and for a moment she pressed it against her chest, as if she could bury it inside herself, hide it where no one could reach. The bar felt heavier now than the night she'd found it, not with promise, but with threat. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark window, waiting for the truck's headlights to slice through the night again. But the road stayed empty. The silence around the farmhouse was no longer simply quiet. It had turned into something alive, something watchful. For the first time since finding the gold, Sam didn't feel rich. She felt hunted. She curled herself around the bar as though it could protect her, but deep down she knew it was the very thing drawing danger closer. The house creaked in the dark, the sound of its old bones shifting under secrets, and Sam wondered how long they had before whoever was out there decided to stop waiting. The attic smelled like time itself, dust, wood rot, and the faint sour tang of something long forgotten. Sam pushed her way through the narrow hatch, the flashlight clamped between her teeth, her free hands pulling at splintered boards and rusted nails. The ladder creaked beneath her weight, every step a warning. She'd avoided this space since moving in, telling herself it was just old junk, but after the man in the truck and the footprints by the barn, she couldn't ignore the gnawing thought that something more than gold had been left behind. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of boxes warped from years of damp, their labels faded to ghosts of handwriting. Cobwebs clung to beams like fragile lace. Moth-eaten coats hung from a rack in the corner, their sleeves deflated like bodies long since abandoned. An old rocking chair sat by a window crusted with grime, unmoving but casting a shadow that made her heart skip. She moved slowly, each footstep sinking into decades of dust. Beneath a pile of newspapers, brittle as autumn leaves, she found a trunk. Its lock had rusted away, and the lid resisted before finally giving with a hollow sigh. Inside were remnants of another life. Farm ledgers, seed catalogs, a cracked photograph of her uncle as a young man standing proudly beside the same farmhouse before time had gutted it. She rifled through them, fingers smudged gray with dust, until something at the bottom caught her eye, a bundle wrapped tightly in a faded cloth. Her pulse quickened. She lifted it carefully, the weight of it surprising, and peeled the cloth back. A leather-bound journal emerged, the cover darkened with age and use. The edges were frayed, the stitching loose in places, but the moment she held it, she knew it was important. She sat on the floor beneath the low rafters and opened it. The first pages were harmless, even dull. Farm expenses written in small, careful script, crop rotations, weather patterns. Her uncle had noted each storm and each dry spell like he was keeping score with the sky. But as she turned the pages, the handwriting grew shakier. The lines slanted, as though written in haste. They're coming for it. I can hear them at night." Sam froze, her breath shallow. She read on. "If you find this, know it wasn't mine to take, but it was mine to keep safe." Her hands trembled as she turned another page, the paper thin and fragile. The words seemed to lean closer to her as she read, like a whisper from a mouth pressed to her ear. "The walls aren't mine anymore. They're listening. If you find the gold, it belongs to the ones who will never stop searching." The final entry sprawled across 2 pages, ink smeared like tears. "I thought hiding it here would be enough, but they always find the scent. I hear trucks at night. I see shadows at the barn. I'm tired of watching. If this ends me, let the next guard be braver." Sam slammed the book shut, her heart hammering. The sound echoed through the attic like a gunshot. She pressed the journal against her chest, staring at the shadows crowding the corners. The flashlight trembled in her hand, its beam wobbling across the rafters. She understood now. The farmhouse wasn't just an inheritance. It wasn't a stroke of luck or a curse whispered by superstitious townsfolk. It was a vault, a hiding place, a trap set decades ago. And by stepping into it, by pulling that gold bar from the wall, she had taken her uncle's place without even realizing it. She climbed down from the attic, clutching the journal like a lifeline, every creak of the ladder sounding like footsteps behind her. Oliver stirred on the couch below, murmuring in his sleep. Sam brushed his hair from his forehead with a shaking hand, then set the journal on the table. The house groaned, low and long, and she could almost hear her uncle's voice in it, weary and resigned. "You're the new guard now?" Sam wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence breathe. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't sure if the house was keeping her safe or keeping her in. The sound of breaking glass split the night like a scream. Sam sat bolt upright, heart slamming against her ribs, every nerve in her body braced. For one breathless moment, she thought she had imagined it, just another creak of the house settling, but then came the unmistakable crunch of boots on broken shards. Someone was inside. She scrambled off the mattress and yanked Oliver into her arms, his small body limp with sleep. He stirred, mumbling, but she hushed him quickly, pressing a finger to her lips as she dragged him toward the closet. The old door creaked as she pulled it open, and she froze, praying the sound hadn't carried. She set him inside, crouching low so their eyes met in the dim light of the hallway. "Not a sound," she whispered. "Do you understand, Ollie?" Not a single sound. He nodded, eyes wide now, fear cutting through the fog of sleep. She kissed his forehead, shut the door gently, and pressed her back to it, gripping the hammer she kept near the bed like it was a weapon that could actually save them. Downstairs the intruder moved with terrifying purpose. Heavy footsteps creaked across the living room floor, slow and deliberate. A flashlight beam swept across the walls, its glow cutting through cracks in the floorboards, dancing up the staircase for a brief blinding second before moving away again. Sam held her breath, hammer slick in her grip, praying whoever it was wouldn't think to climb. Every sound stretched into forever. A drawer yanked open. The scrape of wood against wood. The slam of something falling. Furniture groaned as it was shoved aside. Whoever was down there wasn't looking to steal jewelry or cash. They were searching. Sam pressed her forehead against the closet door, whispering a silent plea that Oliver would stay still, that the stranger wouldn't hear the uneven rasp of his breathing. The minutes dragged like hours, every thud below carving into her nerves. At one point the footsteps came so close beneath her that the floor vibrated under her knees. She imagined the intruder looking up, imagining her huddled there in the shadows, and she nearly sobbed from the pressure of holding herself silent. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The back door slammed, shaking the frame. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the wild pounding of her own pulse. She stayed frozen, waiting, certain it was a trick, that he'd be back. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At last she cracked the closet door, reaching for Oliver, who clung to her neck with arms that shook as hard as hers. "Stay here," she whispered, but he buried his face in her shoulder, refusing to let go. She carried him anyway, creeping down the stairs one step at a time, hammer raised. The smell hit her first. Muddy boots, cigarette smoke, the acrid scent of overturned furniture and open drawers. The living room was wrecked. Chairs pushed aside, couch cushions slashed open, papers scattered across the floor like leaves. Cabinets stood open, their contents dumped in piles. They hadn't taken anything, not food, not clothes, not money, though there was little of that to take. Sam's eyes darted to the patched wall by the staircase, her chest tightening. Whoever had broken in hadn't been after valuables in the usual sense. They knew. They were searching for the same thing she had found in the storm, the thing still hidden in her backpack upstairs. She gripped Oliver tighter, the truth crashing down like another shatter of glass. This wasn't a random burglary. They weren't curious vandals or drifters looking for shelter. They knew about the gold. They had come for it. And the only reason they had left empty-handed was because they hadn't found where it was buried. Yet. Sam stood in the wreckage, her son trembling against her, and realized her uncle's warnings in the journal had not been paranoia. She wasn't alone in this secret anymore. Someone else was already looking. And they weren't going to stop. Sam sat at the kitchen table long after Oliver had fallen asleep, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. The house groaned around her, every sound magnified by the memory of boots crossing her living room the night before. She stared at the patched wall by the staircase, heart aching with the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "Run," her instincts whispered. "Pack up the car. Take Oliver. Disappear before the truck came back." But where would they go? The gold bar still sat buried in her backpack, heavy and accusing. Selling it meant questions she couldn't afford. A bank would report it. A jeweler would ask how she'd come across something stamped with the U.S. Treasury's seal. Even pawning it would risk whispers traveling too fast in a town where gossip spread like wildfire. The clerk at the hardware store had already looked at her like she was carrying a curse, and the man in the truck, he didn't look like he believed in coincidence. Leaving would mean running blind, carrying Oliver into another life of borrowed couches and second jobs, this time with danger nipping at their heels. Staying meant living in a house she was no longer sure was hers to claim. Either way, Oliver deserved safety, not fear. Not this constant weight pressing down on his small shoulders every time the floorboards creaked at night. Her eyes drifted to the hammer lying on the counter, the same tool that had struck gold during the storm. She thought of her uncle's journal, of the scrawled warnings. If you find it, know it wasn't mine to take, but it was mine to keep safe. He had lived in paranoia, guarding walls filled with secrets, but he had done it for a reason. If she didn't dig deeper, someone else would, and whoever had broken into her house wasn't going to stop until they got what they came for. Sam pushed away from the table, her chair scraping against the worn linoleum, and pulled the backpack onto her lap. She unzipped it just far enough to see the gleam of the bar, the way it caught the faint kitchen light, even beneath layers of dust and cloth. Her breath hitched. "I'll protect you," she whispered, not to the gold, but to Oliver, sleeping down the hall. By dawn, she had made her choice. She armed herself not with weapons, but with tools: hammer, crowbar, flashlight, buckets to carry away debris. Each night after Oliver went to bed, she sealed him into safer rooms with the dresser shoved against the door, telling him it was just to keep out drafts. Then she crept into the empty halls, the air heavy with dust, and began tearing into the house piece by piece. Plaster rained down on her hair as she pried at the walls, coughing through clouds of age and decay. The rhythm of her work became mechanical. Strike, pry, listen. She followed her instincts, searching for hollow sounds, for spaces that shouldn't exist. Some nights yielded nothing but rotted wood and nests of long-dead mice. Other nights she thought she heard that same metallic ring deep within the walls, and her pulse quickened as she clawed her way closer. The farmhouse transformed around her. No longer shelter, it had become a battlefield, each wall a question, each creak a challenge. She worked until her arms shook, until her fingers blistered, until sweat stung her eyes and she collapsed onto the floorboards, breathing in dust like smoke. By day, she played the role of mother, serving Oliver cereal at the table, forcing smiles, pretending she wasn't carrying secrets heavier than the bar still hidden in her backpack. By night, she became a scavenger, a soldier, her war waged not with bullets, but with wood and plaster. Every strike of her hammer carried a prayer that she would find what her uncle had hidden before anyone else did. Every scrape of the crowbar was a warning in her ears, reminding her that someone had already searched her house once and they would come back. She wasn't sure how long she could keep it up, how long she could dig before the house itself caved under her desperation. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she wasn't running, not this time. If the farmhouse wanted to bury its secrets, it would have to bury her with them. The cellar was always colder than the rest of the house, damp air clinging to the stone walls like breath from something long buried. Sam had told Oliver not to play down there, said it was too dark, too wet, too dangerous. But Oliver had never been good at staying away from secrets. While she worked upstairs, hammering through plaster and coughing in clouds of dust, he crept down the wooden steps with his sketchbook tucked under his arm, curiosity leading him like a lantern. Stacks of old firewood leaned against the far wall, the logs brittle and gray with age. He traced his fingers along them absently, humming to himself, when his hand brushed something smooth beneath the rough bark, a panel slightly crooked, the edge of it visible if you crouched low enough. His small fingers pried at the seam until, with a reluctant groan, it shifted. Behind it was a hollow. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with years, lay 2 bars. They looked almost ordinary in the dim light, dark, heavy, unassuming. But the moment Oliver touched one, he felt its weight and knew. He had seen his mother hold one before, the way she clutched it to her chest, like it was both treasure and burden. His breath caught, a mixture of awe and pride. He hauled them out clumsily, one under each arm, and dragged them up the stairs, his feet thumping against each step. Sam was bent over near the staircase wall, chisel in hand, when she heard him call. "Mom, look!" She turned, expecting a drawing or a pebble or some small treasure only a child could find magical. Her stomach dropped when she saw the gleam. 2 more bars, heavy in his skinny arms, his grin wide, as though he had discovered buried pirate loot. Sam froze. Her hands went cold, the chisel slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. "Oliver," she breathed, "where did you—" "In the cellar," he said proudly, "behind the wood. There was a door. It was easy." Her heart stuttered. Easy. The word ricocheted inside her like a warning bell. If Oliver could find them with little more than curiosity, then so could anyone else. The intruder who had torn apart her living room, the man in the truck, whoever had been circling this house long before she arrived. She rushed forward, pulling the bars from his arms and setting them on the floor with a dull, heavy thud. She crouched in front of him, her hands trembling as they cupped his face. "Listen to me," she whispered, voice sharp with fear. "You can't go down there again. Do you understand? You can't touch them. You can't tell anyone." His smile faltered. Confusion flickered across his face, then hurt. "But, Mom, maybe Uncle wanted us to find them. Maybe that's why he left the house to you. So we could have them. Maybe it's not bad. Maybe it's a gift." Sam pulled him into her arms, hugging him so tight he squeaked in protest. Her chest ached at his innocence, at his desperate hope that something so heavy, so dangerous could mean salvation. She pressed her face into his hair, smelling the faint trace of dust and childhood that still clung to him. "Maybe," she said softly, though her voice cracked on the word. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the gold was a gift, not a curse, that her uncle had left her more than debt and fear, that there was purpose in his choice, something noble buried in these walls. But as she looked at the two bars glinting faintly in the dim light, she felt the opposite. Each one was another nail in their coffin, another reason for strangers to come looking, another burden she had no idea how to carry. Sam pulled Oliver tighter against her chest, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll protect you, whatever it takes." But in the silence that followed, the bars lay between them and the truth she couldn't say out loud. This inheritance wasn't freedom, it was a trap, gilded and waiting, and now they were caught in it together. The envelope lay on the porch like it had been waiting for her. No stamp, no postmark, just her name written in block letters across the front, the ink pressed so hard the paper had nearly torn. Sam stared at it for a long moment, the hair rising on her arms. Morning sun filtered through the trees, casting the porch in shifting light. But the envelope sat in stark stillness, out of place, too deliberate. She bent down slowly, fingers trembling as she picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Red ink scrawled across it in jagged, uneven strokes, each letter sharp enough to feel carved into the page. "It isn't yours. Leave before you disappear like him." Sam's breath hitched. Her uncle. The words jolted through her like ice water. She gripped the note tighter, the edges biting into her palm, and scanned the yard, the long gravel drive, the empty stretch of road. Nothing. Only silence, heavy and watching. Whoever had left it hadn't knocked. They hadn't needed to. She shut the door quickly, locking it, bolting it, as though paper could walk through walls. Oliver was in the living room, sprawled on the floor with his sketchbook, humming softly while his pencil scratched. He looked up at her and smiled, completely unaware of the storm now thrumming beneath her skin. She forced a smile back, too brittle, then hurried past him into the kitchen. Her hands shook as she shoved the note into the fireplace. She struck a match, touched it to the corner, and watched the flames lick greedily across the page. The red ink blurred, ran curled into smoke that rose sharp and acrid. She leaned close, staring, until it was nothing but black ash. But the words didn't leave her. They filled her chest with smoke, thick and suffocating. "Disappear like him." The fire popped and cracked. Sam sat back on her heels, clutching her arms tight around herself, the glow of the flames flickering against her face. Whoever had written that letter knew. They knew about the gold. They knew about her uncle. And they weren't bluffing. The sound of Oliver's laughter drifted in from the other room as he sketched something funny, his bear dressed as a knight, perhaps. The innocence of it cut her to the bone. She swallowed hard, wiping her eyes before he could see. She couldn't let him know. He didn't need that weight. Not now. Not ever. But the truth pressed in, relentless. The man in the truck, the break-in, the journal in the attic, now this. It wasn't random. It wasn't paranoia. They were being watched. Every moment inside this house, every breath, was under someone else's gaze. That night she lay awake listening to the house breathe around her, Oliver curled safely beside her. She could still smell the burned ink in her hair, sharp and metallic. Her uncle's words echoed from the journal. "They're coming for it. I hear them at night." And now, scrawled in red, "Leave before you disappear like him." She pulled the backpack closer, pressing the hidden bar of gold against her chest beneath the covers. Once she'd thought it was salvation, the promise of a better life. Now it was nothing but a curse, a beacon for danger that had already found its way to her porch. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She had burned the letter, but the message lingered in the air like smoke. Someone wanted the gold, and they wouldn't stop until she was gone, or worse. Sam hadn't planned to tell anyone. Every instinct screamed to keep the secret buried, to hold it close, until she could figure out what to do. But the letter had shaken her, and the nights were getting longer, the shadows heavier. She couldn't carry it alone anymore. On a Wednesday morning, after dropping Oliver at school, she lingered in the hallway instead of heading back to the farmhouse. The building smelled of pencil shavings and cafeteria bleach. a faint hum of chatter spilling from classrooms. Mr. Carter, Oliver's history teacher, stood by the doorway of his room, gathering papers into neat stacks. He was a kind man, late 50s, with thinning hair, and a voice that always seemed steady, like nothing could rattle it. Oliver adored him. Sam hoped, prayed, that meant she could trust him. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice came out thinner than she intended. He looked up, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Hayes, everything all right with Oliver?" "He's fine," she said quickly, though her hands twisted around the strap of her bag. It's me, actually." "I need to ask you something, history-related." His brow furrowed, but he gestured toward the empty classroom. "Come in." The room smelled of chalk and old maps. Posters of World War II timelines and faded photographs lined the walls, pieces of history pinned in neat rows. Sam sat at a desk, clutching the strap of her bag like a lifeline. "I need you to promise," she said, her voice low. "What I'm about to tell you stays here. Just between us." Mr. Carter studied her, then nodded once, his expression softening. "You have my word." Sam hesitated, then pulled the folded piece of cloth from her bag, not the gold itself, but a scrap she had wrapped one of the bars in before hiding it again. She set it on the desk. "I found something in my uncle's farmhouse, something that doesn't make sense. I think it's connected to the past." He raised his eyebrows. "What sort of something?" She swallowed hard. "Gold, bars, marked U.S. Treasury 1947? For a moment, silence filled the room. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide, the papers in his hand forgotten. His face shifted from disbelief to recognition, then to something darker. "There are rumors," he said finally, his voice low. "Stories they don't put in textbooks. After the war, trains carrying gold shipments vanished. Billions, maybe. Some say corrupt officials skimmed it, tucked it away for themselves. Others whispered it was hidden in safe houses, stashed where no one would ever think to look, until debts could quietly disappear." Sam's stomach clenched. "You think my uncle was part of that?" Mr. Carter tapped the desk lightly, his gaze steady. If he had gold like that, he wasn't just a recluse. He was a keeper, someone trusted or forced to guard something meant to vanish. Which means, he paused, he wasn't alone in knowing. The air in the classroom seemed to close in around her. Sam rubbed her hands over her jeans, trying to chase away the chill. "Someone's been watching me." A man in a truck. There was a break-in, and then a letter. Her voice cracked on the last word. Mr. Carter didn't look surprised. He folded his hands, leaning closer. "You need to understand something. People have killed for less than what you're holding. Gold isn't just money. It's power, leverage, silence bought and sold. If word has gotten out that you found some of it, you're already on borrowed time." Sam's pulse hammered in her throat. "So what do I do?" "Hide it better," he said without hesitation. "Or leave before it's too late. If it were me, I'd be gone already. There are people who will stop at nothing for something like this." His words cut deep, harsher than she expected. She thought of Oliver's drawings taped to the fridge, of his laugh echoing in the farmhouse hall. She thought of the gold bar pressed against her chest at night, heavy with both hope and doom. Sam rose slowly, clutching her bag. "Thank you," she whispered. Mr. Carter watched her go, his face grave. "Be careful, Mrs. Hayes," he said softly. "History has a way of swallowing the people who dig too deep." The words followed her out the door, clinging to her like smoke. By the time she reached the car, her decision was made. She couldn't run, not yet. But she couldn't pretend anymore either. She wasn't just living in a house with secrets. She was sitting on the fault line of something much larger, something already shifting beneath her feet. The smell hit her first. Sharp, acrid, wrong. Sam jolted awake, her mind still tangled in dreams, until the haze of smoke cut through her throat like glass. She sat up fast, heart hammering, the sound of Oliver's soft breathing beside her suddenly louder than everything. The air was thick, tinged orange from a light that didn't belong. She rushed to the window and saw it, the barn at the edge of the property glowing like a torch in the night. Flames licked high into the sky, bright and hungry, sparks raining into the darkness. "Oliver," she hissed, shaking him gently. "Wake up, baby, now." His eyes fluttered open, confusion sliding into fear as the smell reached him too. He clutched his bear but didn't argue, letting her pull him from the bed. They stumbled down the stairs, her arm tight around his shoulders, the floorboards vibrating faintly with the roar outside. When she yanked open the front door, the heat hit them like a wall. The barn was fully engulfed, the fire a living thing clawing upward, casting long shadows across the yard. Sam could hear the crack of wood snapping, the hiss of hay combusting. For a moment she stood frozen on the porch. Oliver pressed against her hip, unable to comprehend the enormity of it. That barn had been there as long as the house. Its beams were older than she was, and now it was dying in front of her. She ran barefoot into the yard, dragging Oliver with her until they were clear of the house. He coughed into her shirt, his small hands trembling as he pointed at the flames. "Mom, the animals." "There aren't any, sweetheart," she said quickly, kneeling to his level. "It's empty. Just stay with me, okay?" Her voice was steady, but her insides were shaking. Somewhere behind them, the shrill wail of sirens began to rise, distant but coming closer. She could see the flashing red of the volunteer fire trucks bumping down the old road, their lights cutting through the dark like frantic signals. But she already knew it was too late. The barn's roof sagged inward, collapsing with a sound like thunder, sending a storm of sparks into the air. She stood, arms still around Oliver, and watched her past burn. The barn had been full of her uncle's things, tools, crates, firewood, the ghosts of his life, sealed in dust. She thought of the false panel Oliver had found in the cellar. She thought of the letter in red ink. Her throat tightened as the truth settled on her like ash. This wasn't just destruction. This was a message. The firemen arrived, shouting, unspooling hoses, boots sinking into the mud. Water arced through the night, hissing as it struck the flames. Steam billowed, thick and suffocating. Sam stepped back, holding Oliver close, shielding his face from the sparks that drifted toward them. One of the firefighters shouted something about accelerant, about the way the flames had spread too quickly, too cleanly. She heard the words but didn't need them to understand. Someone had been here. Someone had done this. Oliver buried his face against her chest. "Why would someone do that?" he asked, voice muffled. Sam's fingers tangled in his hair, her gaze fixed on the fire. "I don't know," she said softly, though inside she did. The barn had been a warning. The gold wasn't a secret anymore. It was bait, and she was the prey. By the time the last flames hissed into smoke, only the skeleton of the barn remained, beams blackened and cracked. The smell of charred wood drifting across the yard. Sam stood barefoot in the mud, her arm aching from holding Oliver, and felt something inside her shift. Fear was no longer enough. Someone had crossed a line. She glanced back at the farmhouse. Its silhouette loomed dark and silent against the sky, still standing for now, but no longer innocent. The walls hid gold. The gold drew hunters. And tonight had proved what she hadn't wanted to believe. They weren't just searching anymore. They were closing in. Ash still clung to the farmhouse days after the fire. It lingered in the curtains, in the cracks of the floorboards, in the smell of Sam's hair when she woke up. She had spent the morning scrubbing the dining room walls, wiping away streaks of soot and smoke that had crept in through the open windows during the blaze. Oliver sat at the kitchen table drawing silently, his head bent low over his sketchbook. He hadn't spoken much since the barn burned down, and Sam didn't push. She just kept her hands moving, as though cleaning could scrub the fear out of both of them. Near the edge of the dining room, where the wood planks were warped and blackened, Sam noticed a soft spot under her foot. At first she thought it was damage from the fire, something she'd have to patch before the boards gave out completely. She knelt, brushing the ashes aside, and ran her fingers along the seams. It wasn't just a weak board, it was a panel. Her heart began to beat harder. She glanced at Oliver to make sure he wasn't watching, then pried at the edge with a flathead screwdriver. The board resisted, then shifted with a low groan, like something exhaling after being sealed for too long. Beneath it, a square of darkness yawned open. A trapdoor. She stared at it, the smell of scorched wood suddenly sharper in her nose. The barn had been destroyed, but the house, the heart of the secret, remained. Whoever had come for the gold hadn't found this yet. She pulled the panel back further and peered into the hole. A ladder led down into a narrow room, hidden below the dining room floor. Dust swirled up at her, and the air carried a faint metallic tang. She lowered herself carefully, each rung creaking under her weight, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark. What she saw at the bottom stole her breath. Crates, lined in perfect rows like soldiers waiting for inspection. Wooden boxes stacked chest high, each one stamped with numbers and symbols she didn't recognize. She cracked one open with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilcloth, were bars, gold bars, dozens of them stacked neatly like bricks of another life. The flashlight glinted off their edges, each one catching the beam with a muted glow, a promise and a threat. Sam staggered back, one hand over her mouth. It wasn't just treasure, it wasn't a stash. It was a fortune, more gold than she could have counted at a glance, more than she could have carried if she'd tried. Enough to change everything she had ever feared about Oliver's future, enough to buy safety, medicine, freedom. And yet her stomach turned to ice. Her uncle hadn't been paranoid, he hadn't been eccentric or bitter. He had been guarding something vast, something powerful, something stolen, and now she had inherited not only the farmhouse, but the burden he had died carrying. Her knees gave out and she sank onto a crate, the flashlight trembling in her hand. Above her the ceiling seemed to close in, heavy with the weight of earth and secrets. She pictured the man in the truck, the intruder's flashlight sweeping her walls, the letter in red ink. They knew. They had always known something was here. The barn fire hadn't been an act of frustration. It had been a warning. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her palms, her breath coming in shallow bursts. There was no hiding this forever. No bank, no vault, no plan she could come up with that would outlast whoever wanted it. By finding this room, she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Sam climbed back up the ladder, closing the panel carefully behind her, sealing the darkness in as though that could make it less real. Oliver looked up from his drawing when she returned, his eyes curious. She managed to smile, though her hands still shook. Inside, terror bloomed bigger than the gold ever could. This wasn't a lifeline. It was bait, and she wasn't just holding it anymore. She was standing in the middle of it. The night began in silence, the kind that presses in heavy and restless, every creak of the house amplified, every shadow stretched long. Sam lay awake on the couch, her arm draped protectively across Oliver as he slept, curled against her side. Her body wouldn't let her rest, not anymore, not since the fire, not since the letter, not since she found the hidden room. She kept listening for footsteps that weren't hers, for engines on the road. And then it came, the low rumble of tires on gravel, the sound of a door slamming, another, then another. Sam's breath caught. She sat up sharply, heart racing. Through the slit in the curtain, she saw it. The truck, parked closer this time, its dark bulk crouched at the end of the drive like a predator, and not just one man this time. Two more shadows moved with him. She shook Oliver awake, pressing a finger to her lips. His eyes went wide, fear blooming instantly, but he obeyed, clutching his bear tight. She took his hand and pulled him toward the back door, trying to keep her steps silent. But the sound of breaking wood froze them in place. The front door splintered inward, the crack of it echoing through the house. They were inside. Sam's lungs seized as the floorboards groaned under heavy boots. She dragged Oliver toward the kitchen, but the sound of crowbars dragging against the wall made her stop. A flashlight beam cut across the hall. She turned too late. 3 men stood in the doorway, their faces shadowed, weapons gleaming under the pale light. "Where is it?" the tallest one snarled, his voice low, gravelly, impatient. Sam shoved Oliver behind her, her body the only barrier between him and the men. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand firm. "There's nothing here. You need to leave." The leader stepped closer, lifting his crowbar until it hovered just inches from her face. His eyes were sharp, hungry, like a man who'd already decided how far he'd go. "Don't lie to me." "We know what's in this house," Oliver whimpered, clutching the hem of her shirt. Sam felt his fear like a knife twisting in her chest. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking, but steady enough to hold ground. "You'll have to kill me first." The man's lip curled. He raised the crowbar higher, the metal catching the dim kitchen light. Sam braced herself, praying her body could shield Oliver from the blow, when suddenly the night split open with sound. Headlights flooded the windows, beams slicing across the kitchen like blinding swords. Sirens wailed, rising and falling, louder and closer, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. Red and blue light washed over the house, pulsing through the cracks in the curtains. The leader swore under his breath. "Move!" The men bolted, shoving past each other as they disappeared through the back, their boots hammering against the floor, the crowbars clattering to the ground. Sam heard the screen door slam, the crunch of their feet tearing across the yard, then silence swallowed it all except for the wail of the sirens. She dropped the hammer she hadn't realized she was clutching. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, pulling Oliver into her arms. He buried his face against her chest, trembling, his small hands gripping her shirt as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. A knock rattled the back door, followed by a steady voice. "Police." "Is anyone inside?" Sam didn't move at first. Relief tangled with dread, leaving her body heavy. She held Oliver tighter, whispering into his hair, "It's okay." "We're okay." But her words felt thin, a fragile bandage over a wound that wasn't close to healing. The men had vanished into the woods, but their shadows lingered. They hadn't come by chance. They knew. And now she knew too. The gold wasn't safe. Neither was she. Even as the sirens faded and the flashing lights painted the house in false comfort, Sam understood the truth. The confrontation wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The hunt had started, and she was standing in the center of it. The farmhouse stood quiet in the weeks that followed, its scorched barn a blackened skeleton at the edge of the property, its walls still breathing secrets Sam could no longer pretend to ignore. She had lived in those rooms like a soldier on guard, listening for every engine on the road, every branch snapping in the woods. Sleep had been rare, fear constant. But fear had also sharpened her. It had made her decisive. The authorities hadn't come willingly at first. No one wanted to hear about gold bars hidden in farmhouse walls, not without evidence, not without suspicion of madness. But Sam had shown them just enough. A small crate cracked open in the hidden room, bars glinting under the dull beam of her flashlight. She didn't let them count. She didn't let them see everything. She gave them enough to prove she wasn't lying, and enough to make them care. It took meetings behind closed doors, men in suits who looked more tired than surprised, and stacks of paperwork she barely understood. The deal wasn't clean, not in the way fairy tales promised, but it was real. She would hand over most of it. In return, they promised protection. New locks, patrol cars near the road, a promise, thin but more than she had before, that the shadows watching her house would not return unchecked. At night she told Oliver only what he needed to know, that the gold was too big for them to keep, too dangerous to guard. She promised him that giving it up didn't mean losing everything. What she didn't tell him was that she had kept some aside, not much. A few bars wrapped tightly in oilcloth, tucked into a place even he didn't know, enough to breathe again, enough to buy medicine without fear, to pay for school supplies, to give him a future that wasn't just running. The day came when the house was no longer theirs. The trucks rolled in, men carrying out crate after crate. Sam stood on the porch, Oliver's hand folded into hers, watching the gold vanish into official vehicles bound for vaults and evidence rooms. She thought she would feel lighter, but she didn't. She felt hollow. Every bar that left was a piece of her uncle's secret, a piece of the burden he had carried alone until it broke him. She wondered if she was betraying him or finally finishing what he couldn't. When the last truck pulled away, silence fell. The yard smelled faintly of diesel, of damp earth, of endings. Sam walked back inside the farmhouse one more time, her eyes dragging across the walls, the floorboards, the patched plaster where she had first struck metal with her hammer. She thought of her uncle sitting in these same rooms, listening for trucks at night, waiting for shadows at the windows. He hadn't left her riches. He had left her a choice. Standing in the doorway, her voice barely more than a whisper, she said, "Thank you, Uncle." Oliver tugged her hand, pulling her from her thoughts. His small voice was steady, hopeful. "Mom, we're free now, right?" Sam looked down at him, his wide eyes shining with something she hadn't seen in weeks, trust. She smiled, though it trembled at the edges. "Yes," she said, "we're free." But her gaze lingered on the walls, on the house that had nearly swallowed her whole. They weren't leaving rich. They weren't leaving poor, either. They were leaving alive. And that was more than she dared hope when this began. As they walked down the gravel drive for the last time, Oliver swung her hand, humming softly. The farmhouse loomed behind them, dark and still, holding its secrets the way it always had. Sam didn't look back. She knew if she did, she might not have the strength to leave. The future stretched out in front of them, uncertain, unpaved. But Sam carried something stronger than gold now, something no one could steal. She had learned what her uncle hadn't, what all the bars in the world couldn't buy. Survival was the real treasure, and it was hers. If this story pulled you in, take a moment to let me know where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter coming your way will leave you breathless.